We are super excited to welcome Dr. Erika Lin-Hendel from Not One More Vet. They're on the board of directors. Dr. Lin-Hendel will be presenting tonight's VetFuel on navigating new environments in the veterinary profession. So it's a great topic for both new grads entering the profession and then anyone really making any kind of career move. I think what's presented tonight will really help with that change and transition. A little bit about Dr. Lin-Hendel. They're a relief veterinarian based out of Arizona. In addition to clinical work, Dr. Lin-Hendel is passionate about discussing how intersectional identity plays a role in mental health in the veterinary profession and advocating for educational equity for neurodiverse veterinary students. So that's really awesome. They're honored to serve as a board member, as I said, on Not One More Vet. They're a speaker, a working group member for several organizations, and that includes Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association and Pride VMC. So welcome, Dr. Lin-Hendel.
Thank you so much, Carly, for that introduction. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to speak with you about this. And thank you everyone for joining and taking time out of your evening. All right. So it's lovely to meet you. And as Carly mentioned, I'm a mental health advocate and a student advocate, but I wanted to also share some little pieces about myself because that will help inform you about how I navigate discussing topics in this space. I'm Asian American, multicultural, and also a child of immigrants. I'm neurodiverse, so I am autistic, and I'm also non-binary and queer. So all of these things intersect from a concept of coming and approaching spaces in slightly different ways that might be different from what you've experienced before. Okay, so as a representative of Not One More Vet today, I wanted to share our mission. So NONV's mission is to transform the status of mental wellness within the profession so veterinary professionals can survive and thrive through education, resources, and support. And I invite you, if you're not part of our community, to reach out on Facebook and join the Facebook group and take a look at our website to all the different types of programming that are available. It's a really amazing organization, and I really enjoy being part of the team. So, content ahead. Now, we are in a profession and in these spaces that involve a lot of difficult topics. Some of these spaces for you may or may not stir up some intense feelings. So if that is part of the process, engage as you want to, take breaks if you need. I am going to do some polling questions. All polling is anonymous. And if needed, my contact will be available for private comments, concerns, or questions as follow-up. You can feel free to reach out to the website, the email address that was put up, and reach out and ask for further information, and I will be happy to have a conversation with you. So, let's get to know each other a little bit. I am going to use a program called Mentimeter, and this is just kind of a test question. You want to go to www.menti.com with your phone. If you don't have your phone by you, that's okay. There are going to be other people participating. You can just join through what pops up on the screen in your own head. Use the code 77674032 to engage. Also for people who are joining us with phones, don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. Hopefully there's going to be some interesting information that will pop up. Iowa, I used to live in Iowa. Tennessee, California, Seattle. Looks like we have people from all across the country. I'm going to give that just one more moment to see whether or not we can get people online with this. Wonderful. All right. How are you feeling right now? Take a moment to check in with yourself. Tired, right? So with these word clouds, the way that they work is the more people say a particular word, the bigger it gets and the emphasis, right? We are tired, we are stressed. This is very common with our industry. Overwhelmed. You know what? I want to really express my gratitude for you all being here in these times of being stressed, overwhelmed. Thank you for people who are feeling energized. These are always really helpful things to come together and do that. Also, just FYI, because I'm on my laptop, I have no idea what's happening on the chat. So if anything needs to be brought up later, please know that we will be addressing any sort of questions later.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll monitor the chat for everybody. And Dr. Lin-Hendel, we're also seeing in the chat, tired and frustrated.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is a moment of like demonstrating this is how sometimes we do need to check in with ourselves. We do need to hold space and also hold space for each other, right? And that is a big part of navigating change as well. What is your role in VetMed? So here I've put administrative management, so technicians, students, veterinarians 1 to 5 years or 5+ years. If you are like veterinary leadership, you can choose whether or not you want to put veterinarian 5+ years or administrative management or leadership if you're in leadership. Awesome. Okay. So it looks like we have a really like diverse mix, and it looks like we have, as far as veterinarians go, we have a lot of people who are on the younger side as far as in our practice. Are you currently going to be experiencing change in your professional life? So it's, are you currently experiencing it? Are you planning on it? Are you not sure? All right. Well, I am glad that we were able to have this conversation. Wow. Okay. So we know that hopefully coming from this, that there will be things that will hopefully be helpful to you, and potentially even in this process of having a little bit of an interactive dialogue. Know that you're not alone. All right. What feelings come to mind when you think about change? Yeah, stress, worried, excitement. Like these are big feelings, right? These are feelings that can really take over our cognitive processes, right? Even excitement can take over your cognitive process as far as what you're able to focus on. And these are all things that we'll kind of talk a little bit about. Okay, so now we are going to shift back to our presentation. So thank you for sharing those things with me. I really appreciate it. And so the rest of our journey today, I really use the landing on our feet as, you know, with intention. And that has to do with this fascination we have for the fact that cats can, you know, be theoretically thrown off of very high surfaces or places that, you know, pushed and have an unexpected change in their environment, and they can roll up and land on their feet. And so this has been a classic discussion. And of course, we know that it takes some time for cats to learn how to do this. And sometimes we don't necessarily feel super graceful about it. And that's okay, especially because like I'm taking a look, I saw this kitten and I was like, this is kind of a perfect way to demonstrate. Sometimes we do not feel like we are landing on our feet. And this is not a simple process. So there's an article talking about this actually, because there's an extraordinary amount of publications based on this. And I thought this was so funny, right? I think that I'm using this as a metaphor to talk about how we deal with change in professional, personal life, and how we navigate those spaces. And I'm going to read this aloud. The emotions that are depicted in the photograph are quite complicated. The explanation given is part of the truth, but it seemed incomplete. It was good enough to convince physicists that a cat wasn't violating the laws of physics, but it wasn't good enough to convince everyone that it was the right explanation or the complete explanation. From a physics point of view, the problem has reached a level where the details depend on the specific cat. Right. So I am going to talk about general things. I am going to talk about however, just to understand is that what I have to say today has to have a personal component to you. And what I have to say, you have to use your own critical lens for what you know about yourself, because you are the expert in yourself. So overall, all of these new environments, the theme is change, right? When we are going to new environments and professional places, changing our career, moving, relocating, all of these things create change. And that is actually very difficult. Now, I do have research here, but I'll be honest with you, there is not a whole lot of research talking about this specific type of change. Most of it has to do with things in business spaces, but really, I think what is very important to consider is about mental health, right? Because if we are able to be whole people and get the support that we need, we can do better for ourselves and our communities in navigating change. And so really this is going to be about talking about tools that might make it personal for you and the things that are going to help you, or questions that you can ask of yourself to determine what are the things that are going to work for you as you're navigating these new spaces. Now, this is happening under the lens of what we know about the challenges in our industry in general. Now, the research, there's growing evidence of this. It's a changing target, right? Considering we have all sorts of new things that are happening in the world and in our lives. But overall, and this is from the Merck Wellbeing Study, which I will say is very US specific, versus something that involves a more international perspective. But overall stress, so there's a trend of increasing psychological distress in our industry, suicide, suicidal ideation, depression, student debt or finances, and that is different across the world. Burnout is regularly considered a main concern, as well as compassion fatigue, right? And compassion fatigue actually is underneath burnout. And then also, depending on the background of people, there's a lack of resilience and lack of diversity can be more concerning for particular cohorts. So especially for BIPOC veterinarians, the lack of diversity, and also BIPOC staff members, the lack of diversity in our industry can be particularly distressing and difficult. And so I've shifted the stress to actually distress, right? The experiencing of distress, and the consequences of that are maladaptive coping behaviors. So when we have maladaptive coping behaviors, that would be things like numbing, dissociation, utilizing substances. This is often a big concern about students, right? About utilizing alcohol and coping, and that doesn't necessarily stop with students. And also the other point that I want to bring up on the bottom, especially with the Merck Wellbeing, is there's very, very distinct differences between older veterinarians' well-beings who are more established versus younger veterinarians. And younger veterinarians have a lot more stress around finances, and also burnout in general are at higher risk. Additionally, staff are experiencing much higher levels of distress, right? And I think that it really behooves all of us, no matter what your role is in veterinary medicine, I would say, especially if you're involved in leadership and management, to really think about how we can create compassionate spaces so we as whole people and as whole teams can work collaboratively together to face the already difficult, challenging space that is veterinary medicine. Okay, so back to change. right? Because this change is happening on top of all of the other things that we are dealing with in veterinary medicine. I'll say that one more time. This change is happening on top of all of the other stressors that we have in veterinary medicine, right? And it's multidimensional. So most of the time when psychologists are talking about change, they're talking about behavioral change, right? This has to do with new behaviors, whether or not you're going to work out every day, that kind of thing, right? And not as much research is dedicated to actually being thrown into a new situation. So for example, our new graduates who are graduating from school, both on the technician side and from the veterinarian side, being thrown into new environments where everything is completely different, right? So, but in general, change or dealing with change on a psychological level and a behavioral level requires resisting well-established behavioral patterns, or let's say routines or habits, which means you will be working against unconscious automatic processes in the brain that are designed to make life easier. Now, what does that mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say you decide to reorganize your kitchen. Has anyone done that recently? Or if you're moving to a different place, or if you're cooking in someone else's kitchen, right? And you're like, do we have baking pans? Where do the baking pans live? This is if I am going to be cooking in a friend's house, right? Where I'm like, I don't know what tools are available. I don't know how this oven works compared to my oven, right? Am I going to be able to cook as efficiently in that new space as I am at home in my own kitchen? No, probably not. Am I, with the veterinary professional perfectionism and et cetera type of anxiety brain that we usually have, going to critically potentially beat myself up in the process of not being able to cook as efficiently as I would in my home kitchen in another environment? Yeah, maybe. I'm working on it, right? But this is where we need to actually make space for ourselves and time for ourselves and understand that this is where our perfectionism, that is very much part of our career profession because we care deeply and are doing things for patients and clients and things that we care deeply about and are very dedicated to, right? That we are going to be hard on ourselves. So if we recognize that within change, not only are we changing physical spaces, and if it involves relocation to a new geography, right? There's, let's say when I moved to Iowa, I was like, where do I get my dry cleaning done if I have dry cleaning? Where am I going to go for a yoga studio if I want to have yoga? And all of these things take energy, right, to adjust and to create something for my own comfort level. And all of that is going to take energy. And I might not recognize that it does. So we have changes in physical spaces, social relations, right? If I'm interacting with a new team that has a different background, that has maybe a different way of socializing, that I have to figure out how we are going to relate with one another to get things done collaboratively, right? In a stressful profession as it is, right? So when you think about that, there gives opportunity to both have compassion for yourself and try and advocate for yourself as far as clarifying some of the things that are difficult, or being welcoming for someone who is coming into a new space. And that is where we can create culture, where we can think about resources, right? When you go into a new space, you might not know who the stakeholders are or what is expected. And so all of these things, as much I think as we humans like to think about flexibility, now I'm speaking for myself in this way, I am more of a creature of habit than I'm willing to acknowledge. And this is a thing that we would ask each of ourselves, right? About the things that are big or small when we're navigating change. So the next column I have here in the slightly lighter blue is about the personal spaces, that we navigate and change. So we need time to reflect. We need to be aware to understand what are the things that are difficult for ourselves, what is taking additional effort in order to make a plan, right? Either going into a change that you know is happening down the road, how can I set myself up for success? Or when you're in the midst of it, like, oh, I'm having a hard time. Or if you have change come up, that's not necessarily by choice, right? So if there's management change or a new hospital policy that comes around and there maybe has not been had time for the people impacted by it to have a voice, you might have to make change on something that you don't have a choice with. So all of these things are unique ways that change shows up in our life. And if you can focus on resilience and flexibility in ways that work for you and know how to ask for support for the things that you need, that is where we can have productive conversations. And that's where we can make sure that no one is feeling alone in those spaces. The last column has to do with something even more personal, right? This has to do with acknowledging the space that we are unique and different individuals coming together to work together in a space, right? And we might have different ways or different experiences, different ways of communication, different ways of navigating space that have to do with our background. I'm autistic, right? This means that the way that I communicate can be very different from other people. I have a tendency to be very direct. And in certain spaces, unless people understand that about me or know that when I ask probative questions, I'm not necessarily trying to challenge somebody or undermine them, but I'm actually wanting to engage in a dialogue, right? So we have to be open-minded when we are interacting both with a new team, if we are the person joining a new space, or if someone new is joining us. So understanding that we're all human and creating space for us to give each other grace and to understand where our assumptions and biases are if those things get in the way. All right, so part of this has to do with new graduate hardships. Now, there is a little bit of data about this. There are a handful of publications. None of them are really addressing the space of veterinary technicians and the educational graduation in that space, to be honest. So that's a big gap, right? But there might be some parallels as far as some of the things that people, new grads, are talking about that are really important, that they're feeling lacking in struggling in that new space is access to mentorship that actually works for them, right? And this is particularly important, I think, for people of marginalized identity. For the majority of my life, I had mentors that were like older white men, right? There were a lot of things about their style of mentorship or things that worked for them that I knew was not going to work for me. And that distinction meant that when I found the type of mentorship that I needed, that made a really big difference. So thinking about mentorship and making sure that the mentorship that a new graduate needs, if you're in a role that you can influence that, is having those conversations, making sure that mentorship access doesn't necessarily even just mean someone has agreed to mentor a person and is available, but also that that person who's being asked to mentor has the resources they need to also be successful as a mentor. Students are moving from support to independence. When we think about an academic setting, you have a multitude of different professors, different clinicians, a lot of staff, there are larger hospitals, there is a lot of support there. And so all of a sudden you go from a space where you are surrounded by peers, you have potentially a lot of people that you can bounce ideas off of, to being expected to be a fully functional, independent practitioner. that has to have a guided process. And so a lot of new graduates struggle with spaces that they also might not have had agency before, as far as being a lead clinical case, client management, interactions, and we end up with a lot of imposter phenomena, right? That feeling of being worried, are we good enough? Because sometimes there's not enough space for that feedback conversation, especially if we're in a really fast-paced environment. And I think having that dialogue with whatever space you're entering into about, if someone says, yes, we do mentorship, we have a mentorship program, it's a question of, can we have a conversation about what the specifics of that are, and can we have a dialogue? And there are a lot of really excellent examples of developing mentorship programs involved in corporate veterinary medicine and small scale, and it just requires a conversation. Some of the other aspects that we know is that there are insufficient meeting of learning style needs, so verbal, visual, kinetic, or as far as like learning by doing. A lot of students don't necessarily get their hands on work opportunities in certain environments. So making sure that you have that evaluation of where between the new space that you're working and where you're coming from, that there's actually a deliberate dialogue that's happening. The last thing is that too much all at once, right? So, and this is where learning cannot happen in spaces of overwhelm. Refinement cannot happen in spaces of overwhelm. That's just how our brains work, right? As much as we would like to not be that space. So taking a breath and coming together, advocating for yourself for a plan of specifics, of saying, these are the things that we want to target. Can we divide it up to have it focus on one thing at a time? These are the kind of dialogues that you can have as far as, is there a person that I can go to learn this specific thing? Can I invite them to that conversation so they also are not being pushed in a position where they have to do it at a time that doesn't work for them, right? These are the type of collaborative conversations that can be really helpful. So I kind of took a little bit of the AHA like life cycle of a veterinarian and kind of tried to put it on a slide like this, as far as, because there are parallels across this, right? If we look at the student, the things that they have, the things that they don't have, the new grad, the young professional, and a position of authority. And the reason why I wanted to put this up, because there are these components of hierarchy or power dynamics that happen that we're not necessarily talking about. And as a person that's really interested in accessibility and collaborative conversations, that recognizing when we come to the table and recognize what everyone is coming from, so we can understand how to better design the spaces that we're currently existing in. So if you happen to be on this call and you're actually someone who's going to potentially be involved in mentorship in the future, or in designing mentorship roles or onboarding, right? Because this happens when we switch industries or switch locations, switch specialties, all of these things that can happen from hospital to hospital. Understand the kind of roles or expectations that are having, it's all in negotiation, and we cannot have these, we cannot have a clear path if we don't have a clear conversation about it. So these are things at the very bottom. I have a list of some of the things that are common struggles that then make the adjustment to change more difficult, right? And when we think about the young professional, where are they coming from? They're coming from the new grad. Where is the new grad coming from? They're coming from the student. And all of these struggles that we carry this with us, basically, until we don't, right? And what is the process of divesting or unlearning, right? You have to have enough space. So within the student, right, we have internationally, there have been some surveys done, sleep hygiene, right? I didn't sleep normally until maybe like 2 years after I graduated. I had disrupted sleep because our students are pushed to the limit, right? Our interns and residents are pushed to the limit. When you cannot sleep, our brains do not function well. And I really don't understand how some leadership continues to feel or expect that we should be perfect when we're functioning off of 15 hours of sleep in 5 days. It's just not going to happen, right? And so compassionate space is about recognizing where we are as humans as far as the basics, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail in the future in this presentation about how we navigate these extra stressors to deal with bandwidth. Because in order for us to be successful with change, we have to have enough bandwidth to process all of the different components that are feeding into it. Okay, so here's just a list of things that we don't often get taught in school, or even in internships and residency. I say this very regularly in a lot of talks that I give. Veterinary medicine is not just about the medicine, and we need to actually really live that. And we still don't. As a profession, we still don't. Even when I work at certain clinics, right? When I'm asking questions, I sometimes get dismissed by saying, just focus on the medicine, right? Just focus on the medicine. If you do good medicine, everything will be fine. Nope. That's not true. It's not true. And it's really caused a lot of problems. We are whole people. We are whole people. And making sure that as we are adjusting and stepping into change, that we can think about ourselves as whole people, we can think about our team members as whole people, is how we can help each other through change. So the design gaps, our curriculum, right? Veterinary students are mostly taught about medicine and only expected to perform on their medical knowledge. There's very, very, very few universities that are also including professional growth. I mean, that's changing, right? But knowing that we are not going to see the benefit of that for a bit, right? So interpersonal communication, conflict management, flexibility and negotiation, effective time management, leading client communication, different communication styles, collegial compassion rather than competition, right? Building social capital. How do we build our relationships with our colleagues? How do we maintain them? How do we rebuild trust when there's conflict? And very importantly, knowing that students are coming in from spaces where they didn't have autonomy and choice necessarily, right? It's almost discouraged, right? So now we're asking after 4 years from someone who didn't have autonomy and choice, all of a sudden to have autonomy and choice. That can be a complicated change and shift. And that's something that we have to support, because very often it's a matter of building that confidence in your ability to navigate having autonomous decisions, right? Because that can be very intimidating. And so these are some of the nuances, right? So the goal, theoretically, right, is to thrive in a new environment. That's like, everyone is coming here to say, I want to be able to thrive in this new environment. I want to have confidence. Well, do not expect the strategies used for surviving to result in thriving. All right, I'll say that one more time. Do not expect the strategies used for surviving to result in thriving. And this is probably one of the biggest things that I talk about, right, is that when we are just surviving, right, when we are making do, when we are expected to establish meaningful relationships with our clients in 15-minute appointments, I can't do that yet, right? I can't do that. I question if that is sustainable for our doctors, for our staff, for our relationships, for building rapport. right? And that kind of high pressure, when people say we are in a high pressure environment, if we're always in survival mode, this is why we're at such high risk for burnout, because we have no space to process anything. So it gets stuffed away, stuffed away, stuffed away. And then at some point or another, it all falls apart. Right. And it might just happen for an evening. Like, I can reflect on how many times I have just had to fall down in a sobby mess. And not just because of having a difficult euthanasia, right? Death doulaing is part of our profession, right? And that also requires space and honoring. However, like, this is that space of we cannot face such big things if we do not have even space for ourselves. Okay, so now you're a fill in the blank. Now you're a doctor, right? Now you're a doctor, now you're a lead technician, now you're a senior technician, now all of a sudden you have these new responsibilities. And I can say affirmatively, most places that I have observed throughout the industry, nonprofit organizations, like, onboarding is notoriously terrible, right? So you frequently get put in these positions, and sometimes people are just assuming that you're going to be okay, right? So I'm telling you, if you're going into a new situation and you need something, other people are going to already be in automatic mode. They are in their routines. You are the new factor, and you, as an outside observer or a third party, have to come in and say, hey, I need more information. I need clarification. I need understanding about what expectations are. What does success mean, right? These are all aspects of navigating new roles as well. So sometimes there is a new person on the team, right? I've already talked a little bit about this, the different types of dynamics, or the unexpected landmine when, and I call those are things that, like, it was assumed that you were supposed to know that this was part of your role, but no one told you, or you didn't get the resources you needed to get this. So navigating these conversations are really important, and thinking about what type of practice you're moving into and how that might change. So if we're going for an academic space, you might have more resources available, more machines available to run diagnostics. But if you have a small practice, it might take half an hour to run and get results, and then you have 3 doctors in line. So that changes how you navigate your time. Burnout risk is higher when there's chaos and a lack of control. So when we think about things, now you're in a new position, think about, where is your autonomy? Where is your sphere of influence? And what type of structure you're able to have versus when you're feeling chaotic. So these are the check-ins to have with that. Now, this is going to be available as far as a recording. I want to make sure that I pop on through the rest of the presentation, but I really invite you to think about how you process change, right? Give yourself that space when you're navigating it. Where are you coming from? What do you like about it? What are the things that you feel confident in? What are you lacking in confidence? All of these things are about having conversations. Okay, so joining in a new team. On the left, I have what we want, right? We want an environment where everyone's like, oh, welcome, welcome, right? Sometimes people want different things from new people joining on the team, and everyone is going. The practice manager might have a different expectation versus other technicians that you're going to be working with, versus the front desk, versus people in HR if you're working in corporate structure. So, we have this idea that we're going to be ready from a race, right? That it's maybe a clear path, And the next picture I actually have is orienteering, right? Orienteering, where you have all these people are like, I've got a map. What does it mean? What direction am I going? What does that mountain mean? Right? So giving ourselves a little bit more space to actually understand what different things are feeding into it. So I will say this again, and I know that this is something as both onboarding and as like community veterinary partners already cares deeply about this issue by having this discussion today, right? So understanding that there are a lot, everyone is doing the best they can, and often we need to have a conversation with each other, right? And recognize that onboarding when you're joining a new team, it is like drinking from a fire hydrant, right? And it's very short. Sometimes people are like, we're going to onboard you in 3 days. And I was like, do you think I'm going to remember all of these things after 3 days? Like, you're sitting there and people are talking at me like 20, like 5 different people I'm sitting on, I have 15 different conversations. How do I submit this for reimbursement? I don't know, right? So understanding or having that, sometimes you have to remind people too. And you can say, hey, I've experienced a lot of information. I don't know how to do this. Can you remind me? Right? And sometimes in these clarifications, if you put in little, hey, don't forget, not everyone is going to be able to hold on to this in this time. We're going to need review. We need time to integrate. And of course, all of these things stem back to communication. If anything is going to help anyone navigating new spaces, it's going to be about communication, right? And the thing that I would say that is most powerful is how to invite people for a dialogue and have a collaborative discussion. These are things that I learned not from veterinary medicine. This is stuff that I learned from facilitation. And so you may have to model the dialogue you want to create and give people space to understand it, right? And that sometimes is hard. These are some things that I've used, right? And a lot of it comes from facilitation spaces from Black feminists, right? Also nonviolent communications. And if we come to discussions with this and focus on inviting people to a conversation, if you're the new person in the room, it's okay. Because if you have those communication skills and can have a collaborative discussion, people are going to want to work with you. Right? And so these are some examples. And some of the things that I come from my approach is if you design your communication to be as universal and accessible as possible, know that when there is a disconnect, that it's not you, right? It's a situation, and you can come to it to ask more questions. And this is, again, where we build a collaborative space. So the things that I would say in this is also about understanding sphere of influence, understanding you might need to talk to several people to figure out who to talk to. So language like different stakeholders. Who's the problem owner? Is there somebody in charge of this? Are you the person that I need to talk to? Can you help me? Or, hey, like, do you have a moment? Or is now a good time? Like all of these things create space for that other person that you're asking for help in navigating change to engage with you and see you as a person. And engage on a personal level. So you can have that social capital and you can have a collaborative conversation in time that works for everyone, right? And this is where people who are working in the field, boots on the ground, right, will be able to work together. And then you can have different conversations with management as far as what type of expectations, what timeline, right? What are things that I need support with? Is that something we can do or not? If it's not something that we can do, what's the negotiation, right? And every time it's just, I'd like to invite you to a conversation. That's all. Now, sometimes the trick is actually having the space to get it done because you know that things are very busy. All right, this next spot is going to be a whirlwind because I really would love to have time for some conversation and dialogue. So I changed the picture, right? I've got this peaceful image, Arizona sunset, right? And knowing that we're going to breathe, and this is really focusing on mental health spaces. We face anxiety, depression, burnout, suicidal ideation, imposter phenomena, perfectionism, lack of self-compassion, trauma, right? These are all interrelated, right? Although the top 4 are things that are described as most commonly in our industry, then the next 4 are still high up there, right? And if these, depending on what is impacting you, it is important, right? I don't care if it's not the number 1 thing affecting our industry. If it's the number 1 thing affecting you, that's important. And so there might not be the resources available. So one of the things that I'd like to say is that part of these things, we hear these buzzwords, right? And it's important to actually know what they mean, because sometimes, because we're so focused on the task of hand and we're putting ourselves last, which is incredibly common in our industry, we might not even know, right? We might not even know that what we're experiencing is actually clinical depression. And if you are experiencing clinical depression, you're not going to be able to thrive with change. It's going to be harder, right? The other thing I'd like to note is a lot of these things are interconnected. How these are defined, for example, suicidal ideation is frequently part of depressive episodes, right? Burnout is an offset of depression also. They can be interlinked. And so what it means is that our mental health journey, we can approach it the same way that we approach veterinary medicine, right? Each of these mental health challenges are described as impacting feelings, actions, behavior. They have physiological components, they have time periods, change from previous function, they have risk factors and protective factors, and we can utilize those to our advantage, right? And we already have the tools, right? So we can apply this to ourselves and our own lives to benefit. It's just another area of medicine. So when I approach any of these different challenges, I take a look, I think about physiological, emotional, the cognitive distortions that can be, and false narratives that can take presence in our mind, the behavioral changes that can come with it, and how those can impact our interaction with environment and community, right? And these are all things that can allow us to have our own agency, create our own agency and autonomy in spaces where we might not be experiencing that in the actual choices that we're able to make. Out of all of these things, resilience is consistently described as a protective factor for mental health, for depression, for anxiety, for burnout, right? So one of the things, it's defined as adapting well in the face of adversity, but in studying it, things have to be, in order for people to tap into their resiliency skills, predictable. Is veterinary medicine predictable? No. Manageable, having control. Do we have control of veterinary medicine about our experience? No. And explainable. Can we always explain things in veterinary medicine? No. So the thing that I'd like to point out is that we need to give ourselves grace, right? Because we're always trying to achieve the most that we can, and understand that there are barriers in our way just by being in veterinary medicine, right? So this is actually a veterinary definition. And the thing that I want to say with this is that these things are dynamic. We are not going to be A+ every day. And we know that, right? I know that. But do I still hold myself to that false narrative of perfectionism? Absolutely. All the time. I have to check myself on that. So these are things when we're navigating change, and it's kind of the same space. Again, the factors that support or interfere with resilience, we can focus on trying to up things in one space and decrease. But the things that I would say is that if you're experiencing discrimination, if you're experiencing continual barriers, if you are experiencing things that undermine your confidence, and this is also for management, right? People are not going to be able to tap into that resilience. And when we don't have that, we have burnout, right? It's not as simple as just saying, we're going to be resilient, right? There are multiple factors that go into it, and we have to really try and shift structures to emphasize how we can have some more stability in an unpredictable field. So, getting ready for the unexpected. This is also about our planning. This is Erika's 3 steps, right? And we talked a little bit at first, you have to know where healing needs to happen and give yourself the space to do that, and understanding that it might take time. So we have to recover from the trauma that we've experienced. We might need help, right? And we have to take a look at our behaviors and have an honest conversation with ourselves. Step 2, baseline: sleep, nutrition, hygiene, shelter, order, right? How many people eat 3 meals today? Right? When I'm working clinically, now it's real hard. How am I? Of course, I'm going to be exhausted at the end of the day. Of course, I'm not going to sleep well if my body's like, we need to cannibalize ourselves because you didn't eat, right? Getting calories, getting enough sleep. We cannot be successful in these spaces if we do not do these things. Evaluating our ongoing obligations. So this is about bandwidth, right? If we increase our bandwidth, we can deal with stressors like change. So talk about baseline, ongoing obligations, things that you like to do. If you're, family, romantic relationships, you're planning that trip, and of course, unplanned things happen, right? The water heater breaks. You blow out a tire and have to replace your tires. I don't like so many things, right? All of those things take emotional and physical bandwidth. And when we hit our limits that are very real, there are ramifications and injury. So again, when we're dealing with change, right, that is part of either planned or unplanned. And we just have to recognize that we have limits, and we do not like hearing that as a profession, right? So here are some tools: delegate, ask for help, learn new skills. If you have to learn new skills, you also have to budget the bandwidth for it. So think about what drains you and restores you, especially if you're going into change. Things that are helpful, right? And the things that are not serving you, or the things that are behaviors that served you when you were surviving and now you want to thrive, you might have to have an evaluation of what needs to go out, right? And to do that, you need to take some time to do that. Spoon theory is another way to think about this. I'm not going to talk about that, but one of the things that I want to point out is that we have these hierarchy of needs, right? This is actually from the Blackfoot Nation, based off of theories of the Blackfoot Nation. The Western perspective ends with the individual. And the First Nation perspective, it goes beyond the individual. And I think that's really what we need to think about as a profession, right? Because in the long term, we want cultural perpetuity. We want our industry to continue to grow and thrive. And so, yes, do these things for yourself, and also think of how you can support the people around you, right? It's not just us, but also the people around us. So how can we invite all of the different conversations that need to happen? And at the end of the day, if all you can do is hack your brain, that's what we need to do, right? Sometimes that's all that is left. Mind My Peelings is a really, really great website. I really suggest visiting it. and understanding that we can hack our brains by just sometimes that's all we can do because we don't have enough faith. And this is an amazing chart. Laughter, eating dark chocolate, physical touch, socializing, shower, these things. Sometimes I look at this and I'm like, I look at this list, increasing happiness levels. This is my breathing stuff. I ask myself, have I done some art? Right? Doing an art piece on a weekly basis. And sometimes this is just creates enough to get myself back in my body and my existence as a human being to then have the ability to process the things that are happening to me. And sometimes that's change. So in summary, this I just came up with today, so I kind of like it because I really like art and creativity. So be a poet, right? Plan with self-knowledge, observe and reflect, evaluate your values, and talk by inviting dialogue. All right. With that, thank you so much for your presence and being here and sharing. I hope there was something of value to you. And if you are going to reflect on questions, I also am happy to hear. I'd like you to think about what is interesting, meaningful, memorable, evocative, provocative, or unique about our shared experience today, and carry that with you. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I love that. So you just came up with be a poet today. That's awesome. I love that. We do have a couple questions. I'm going to grab the first one that's in the chat. So that one is, what advice do you have on making a decision to change jobs, especially for someone that is dealing with burnout and compassion fatigue?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I did that not too long ago. I think that something that I think is really important is understanding the things that are barrier, like what are the fears around making that decision? Because leaving a job isn't free of consequence, right? I think that thinking about what are the things that are important for your stability and your well-being to meet obligations that you want to meet, and having a real honest conversation with yourself about how do you define your own quality of life, right? We talk about that with our clients and our patients, and I would say, ask yourself, what are indicators of your well-being? I know that when I am happy, I sing more, right? And I laugh more, and I make jokes. And if I reflect and say, when was the last time I was singing to myself in the car, happily, right? When was the last time I did something creative where I felt like I even had bandwidth to do something creative? When was the last time I cracked a joke, right? If I notice that I am retreating into myself and I'm not doing those things, that's when I know that it's actually compromising my well-being in a significant way, and that I know, at least for myself, if I stay in those types of environments, I am going to potentially put myself at risk for a depressive episode, and I don't want to do that. So I can't necessarily, all I can say is that take a look at what's important to you and what's important to your well-being. And if it's not making the cut, I would say consider a shift. And sometimes even making that decision gives you the space you need to continue to be in that place until you can make a shift in a way that is healthy for you.
That makes total sense. And that actually kind of goes into this next question that we have. Navigating change can sometimes be harder than just staying in a place of burnout. What is your advice for seeing the light at the end?
I try for myself to find little ways to give myself faith. I think that it can be very, very powerful to just name the things that you're going through. So even stating, I am burned out, right? And it means that I don't know what to do. And then that fear of change, yeah, it is not insignificant. But I would say that when we are in burnout, we cannot actually make good decisions for ourselves. So finding a way to create enough space to rest enough to collect yourself, to getting to a point of caring about yourself first. And I think that's a statistic. Like there's burnout on the side of like professional expectation and performance at work. And then there's like burnout of all things, right? Where like, and the burnout of all things is the really concerning thing, because that's where we get into clinical depression, right? When people are, I don't want to do anything. I want to crawl into bed and go to sleep and do nothing else. There is a frightening amount of that in our profession, and it is heartbreaking, right? And so I think that if you don't have this space, and because there are a lot of barriers to making a professional change, if you can even get 24 hours, right? If you can even get like a weekend where you sit and you say, I'm really going to have a conversation with myself on planning, how do I create care for myself? How do I enlist people in my life to create care around me so I can start to reconnect with my feelings and taking a step. And it's a recovery process, right? Once we're already in burnout, we have to heal. It is unavoidable. And I can't say how long it is for each individual person. I know for me, it took me 6 months to recover from burnout. I needed personally probably about a month of full rest, of just giving myself the freedom to engage in work that is meaningful to me. So I did volunteerism in order to heal enough to then have the space to reflect. It's going to be different for every person. I describe myself as high needs. So, but I think that's the honest thing, is that once we're in burnout, we really, really need to take a moment and really put care in ourselves and community and get our support network around us to bring us back to a place where we can critically evaluate things and make decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. It's sometimes it's easier said than done with a lot of things, but someone did put in the chat, you don't feel bad about it. You have to do it and you don't feel bad about it. So that's good advice too.
100%.
Yeah. Those are all the questions. We have a lot of words of gratitude in the chat. Everyone really loved it. Someone said, I really needed this in 2016. And I didn't know burnout, or I didn't know about self-care until NAMB became real. So this was a really great talk, and I think a lot of people needed it. So thank you.
You're very, very welcome. In closing, I'd just like to say, taking care of yourself and taking rest is a radical act, right? It is not only just like something to not apologize for, but it is something to be proud of. There is a lot of information out there, especially coming from civil rights activism and social justice work, of the radical act of resting and taking rest. And those are spaces that I think are worthwhile to explore and have a lot of wisdom. So yeah, thank you for being here.